For the time we have together on this occasion, I'd like to talk about relatability, especially as it shows up in Acts chapter 17, and then go back and we'll address a few statements in previous chapters in Acts. Relating the gospel to individuals to whom you speak is something that is often overlooked. Sometimes the idea is, well, let's just have a message on the background of the gospel and the story of Jesus, and that it's like one shoe fits every size, and it doesn't. The facts don't change. But I need to understand the audience that I address, whether it's one individual or a group. So in Acts chapter 17, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Paul is in the country of Greece, and in these Greek cities, there are inevitably, in some of the larger cities, a group of Jews that actually are large enough in number they've established a synagogue, and that's the case here in Thessalonica. So Paul knows something of their background. That's obvious. And knowing the background of these who are living in this Greek city, but they're Jewish, he knows something of their beliefs. So what happens? Beginning in verse 2, Paul, as his custom was, went into them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ. He knows their background. He knows the basic beliefs that they possess. And the way he approaches the story of Jesus is by showing the fulfillment of those prophecies of the Messiah that they have read and memorized, been aware of, almost the entirety of their life. So the statements made down in verse number 4, some of them were persuaded, and a great multitude of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women, joined Paul and Silas. Persuasiveness of the message. And that's something that actually is aided by a knowledge of the background of the audience, the basic beliefs of that audience. But it's not without confrontation. Verse number 5 and following. The Jews who were not persuaded, becoming envious, took some of the evil men from the marketplace and gathered a mob. They set all the city in an uproar, attacked the house of Jason, sought to bring them out to the people. When they didn't find him, they dragged Jason and some brethren to the rulers of the city, crying out, these who have turned the world upside down have come here also. Jason has harbored them, and these are all acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying there is another king, Jesus. They troubled the crowd and the rulers of the city when they'd heard these things, and finally you find Paul and Silas being sent to another city. But the way to relate the message to the background of these people is without question. Now later on you find him in another city, verse number 10. Paul and Silas went away to Berea, not Thessalonica, but Berea. When they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Same approach. Know their background, know their beliefs. The statements made in verse 11, these are more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness, and they searched the Scriptures daily to find out whether these things were correct. Many of them believed. Not just a few of the Greeks, but a number of the Greeks believed. Prominent women as well as men. Same response. Persuasiveness of the message. But again in verse 13, when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was preached by Paul at Berea, they came there also and stirred up the crowds. There's the conflict once again. So they have to move one more time. They're still in Greece, but they go to the city of Athens. The statement's made in verse number 17 that Paul reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers in the marketplace daily, with those who happen to be there. And the view is expanding, but the elements are the same. The relatability of Paul to the background of these individuals is again without question. To those who are of Judaism, going into the synagogue, he knows their background, he knows their beliefs. But Paul is well acquainted, as a Roman citizen, Paul is well acquainted with the beliefs of many in that other culture as well. being able to reason with him in the marketplace. So much so that in verse 18, certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered Paul, and some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection." They take him into the Areopagus, to that hill in Athens where all those temples are found. And they say to him, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak? You're bringing some strange things to our ears. We want to know what these things mean." Paul knows something again of their background. He knows something of their beliefs. In fact, it's well known that the Athenians and foreigners who were there spent a lot of time in telling or hearing some new kind of philosophy or idea that's suggested in verse 21. Paul begins with a statement in verse 22, "I perceive that in all things you're very religious, for as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship," verse 23, "I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you." There's a point of connection. I know something about the background of these people, the pantheon of gods, the multiplicity of gods and goddesses they worship. I know something of their belief system. But here's a point of entrance and relevance, and raises some curiosity. You even have a statement that says, "to the unknown God." There is an awareness on your part that you may have left somebody out. So let me declare to you the person that you are endeavoring to worship without knowing who that being actually is. He begins at that point and talks about Jesus ultimately, but he talks about some of the writings of their own poets. Relevance, relatability to where these people are. So why doesn't he start with the Old Testament? It wouldn't have related to this group of people whatsoever. I've got to know something of the background of the people to whom with whom I discuss the gospel of Jesus Christ. Confrontation in this particular point, kind of some differences in what you have seen earlier. In verse 32, when they heard Paul speak of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." They don't stir up any kind of violent animosity. The pagans actually seem to be more lenient toward Paul than those of Judaism. But relevance, relatability. You don't find that just in Acts chapter 17. You find that all the way back at the beginning. In Acts chapter 2, when Peter proclaims the message of Jesus to people that are gathered in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, he's speaking to a Jewish audience. He talks about those prophecies about the Messiah. The relatability, something exists again. In chapter 3, there's an individual that is unable to walk, that is placed at one of the gates of the temple, and he begs just for subsistence so he can survive. And Peter makes a statement when he passes by, as they're going in, he and John are going into the temple at the hour of prayer. "I don't have any silver and gold, but let me give you something that I do have." Again, relatability. Relatability is something that exists when you find Philip actually preaching to the Samaritans in Acts chapter 8. Relatability to the man from Ethiopia who's reading out of Isaiah. It happens to be reading Messianic prophecy. Philip begins at that same passage and preaches to him Jesus. Relatability is something that exists all the way through sharing the gospel of Jesus. So if somebody says, "Well, you just need to preach the basics," that's true. You need to preach the facts of that message and the events of the life of Jesus, that sacrifice on the cross and that resurrection, and what Jesus expects of us to do to be the benefactors of that sacrifice. But it's not the case that one approach fits everybody. I need to know the background of that individual and create that curiosity in their mind, and then point out how the life of Jesus fits them where they are in life. The relatability is something that is sometimes missing the way people approach non-Christians with the story of Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. Acts chapter 17. is a prime example of knowing something about the background and the beliefs of the person to whom you're speaking, or the audience that is listening to the message. And it's good advice to take to heart every time we talk to someone who does not know the story of Jesus. Let's find out what they have in their background upon which we can build, and then share with them the greatest story ever told. Interesting chapters. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.